is Kathleen Crowther, and I'm president of the Cleveland Restoration Society, and we are so excited to have this brief program to unveil a very important historical marker in our community, one for Mayor Carl Stokes. Our organization has a mission to preserve, protect, and celebrate Cleveland's heritage. We believe that our cultural heritage, as represented in historic buildings and different traditions and histories of our diverse citizens, is essential to strengthening our community, a community that supports and protects American democracy. This year we are celebrating two big anniversaries. Our organization, and guess what, the Cleveland Landmark Commission too, 50 years old. Actually, Landmarks is 51, but that's pretty big, 50 years old. The Landmarks Department here in the city of Cleveland has been staffed for 51 years by really highly competent people. You may not know we have one of the best landmark ordinances, certainly in the state of Ohio, maybe in the country. Our organization was started really close after the commission because we were meant to collaborate and support the commission, which we certainly do. I would like to take 1 second to recognize Don Pettit, who is the esteemed head of our Landmark Commission. He is a gentleman who's oftentimes in the background, but boy does he work hard, and he's been working hard for our community for 30 years, and he's going to retire this summer. Don Pettit, give him a round of applause. Our organization, too, has been operating to support heritage for 50 years, and our lead program is the Heritage Home Program. That's been operating now for 30 years, which kind of blows my mind because I've been here for those 30 years. We started the program in collaboration with the city's Department of Community Development, and one of our esteemed bankers in the city of Cleveland, whom some of you may know. His name is Bracy Lewis, an honorary life trustee of our organization, sitting in the front row. We appreciate you, Bracy, and all of the things you have done for our community. The program that he helped us start, if you can believe this, we have worked with over 40,000 citizens in the city of Cleveland and have booked almost 1,000 loans worth $35 million. So you may not even know about that because we've always been sort of low on PR, but I'm going to do a little PR moment because it's really a remarkable thing. Our two other main focus areas are in the preservation of historic religious buildings, sacred landmarks, of which we have remarkable buildings and remarkable congregations that represent our diverse community. So we work very hard to help preserve those incredible buildings. And we're also very dedicated to the preservation of African American history, the heritage of the majority of our community. With support from a wide array of funders, including the National Park Service, the National Trust for Historic Preservation, the National Endowment for Humanities, Ohio Humanities, and others, local corporations and funders, we're leading one of our most important initiatives right now, and that is to establish an African American Civil Rights Trail in Cleveland. Yay, thank you. The work to bring equal rights to Black citizens did not just happen in the South, as we know, it happened across the country, and Cleveland played an important role in this struggle, a struggle that continues to this day. The trail will consist of a series of Ohio historical markers. These majestic bronze markers you're going to see in a minute. You've seen them across our community. So these markers are really dignifying and mark important spots where civil rights took place. Each marker will have a QR code. Raise your hand if you know what a QR code is. I'm going to figure out how old you are. And the QR code takes, you put your cell phone up to it, and that's going to take you to our dynamic website that will tell you much more than just a marker can about either this particular site and the civil rights movement in Cleveland and indeed across the country. So we are very excited today to unveil our second marker in this trail. And so today it is in honor of Carl Stokes, the 67th mayor of the city of Cleveland. Why, I was just a young girl, and I remember my dad driving me past his house, and he said, "That's where Carl Stokes lived, on Larchmere." And so to tell us a little bit about Mayor Stokes is the chairwoman of our Civil Rights Trail Committee, the remarkable Natoya Walker Minor. Dr. Natoya Walker Minor.
Good morning. It is so good to be here today with this second marker honoring the Honorable Carl Stokes, the man, the great-grandson of a slave who beat the great-grandson of a U.S. president, the man of Central, the pool shark, the attorney, the people's leader, Carl Stokes. And in beating the great-grandson of a president, he exemplified diversity in action because they became friends. At a time on the heels of the civil rights movement, when so many things were occurring across this country, occurring right here in this community. And that is why it is critically important that we have this marker. My favorite line from the movie A Few Good Men: a son never forgets. A city must never forget the hills from which we stand on, the shoulders of those that we stand on. We stand on the heels of the Honorable Carl Stokes for all that he did and the 5 things that he represented throughout his mayoral term: housing, transportation, education, health. Those remain from that day to this. The things that we must do in this community. So you too must get involved in whatever it is in your community so that we can change the dynamics. The social determinants of health, we didn't use that language then, but the Honorable Stokes knew what it was at that time. We must continue in his legacy, in his footsteps to do that work. He talked about political power. We must organize so that we can affect change in our community. We must support our elected leaders so that we can get things done. We must make sure that our young people are educated and they can go into public policy, they can go into corporate Cleveland and affect change. We have work to do. It's 55 years later and we still have work to do. And that is why I am thrilled and delighted to be a part of this committee, to honor the Civil Rights Trail in this committee, because far too many, even in this community, don't even know that civil rights happen right here. And so we have these markers, and it's on you to make sure that your young people look at these and read these and internalize what it means. Not just a marker, but action. The Honorable Stokes was about action, and he led at a time, an unprecedented time of civil unrest. And while we still have that civil unrest, we've come a long way. But in the words of the poet Robert Frost, and many miles to go. That means you and I. Thank you and God bless you.
Awesome. We do have a couple members of our Civil Rights Committee, and maybe you could raise your hand and we could thank you for your participation on the committee. Are you so shy? Okay. And we do have members of the Carl Stokes Brigade sitting right here. These young people here are going to pick up the mantle, Natoya. Now, we'd like to conjure up the memory of Carl Stokes. And we have a wonderful actor in Cleveland and a retired politician by the name of Peter Lawson Jones, who is going to portray Carl Stokes. But I thought he came. Has anyone? I thought I saw him. I don't know. Is he MIA? Oh.
What a magnificent building. Cleveland City Hall. I mean, that stately edifice is still just as majestic as I remember it 50 plus years ago. You know, I probably spent more of my time here between 1967 and 1971 than I did at my own home. But you know, there's been several occupants since me, and I understand that there's a very impressive young man that's now at the helm of the city. The current occupant, a Justin Morris Bibbs, or something like that. And I hear he's really inspired. You don't know him yet? You should meet him. But I hear he's really inspired this city with his electric vision for the future of the city. My goodness, have I interrupted something? Well, please, excuse my manners. I guess I should at least introduce myself. My name is Carl Burton Stokes, and I had the honor of serving as the 51st mayor of the city of Cleveland. And as a matter of fact, I think I see my youngest son over there, Cordell. So good to see you. Well, you know, mine is that universal poor boy story, but fortunately, in our country, it's often the start of the fulfillment of the American dream. Now, I was raised in one of the most impoverished neighborhoods in the city of Cleveland. My father was a foundry worker who died when I was only 2 years old, and that forced my mother Louise to go to work full time to support my older brother Louis and to support me. Now, she worked for over 20 years for very meager pay as a domestic in the homes of wealthy Clevelanders. And she had to supplement the little bit she made with a welfare stipend. Now, we lived in the downstairs unit of a rundown, ramshackle double. We used to have to cover the rat holes with the lids of tin cans, and we had to be very careful because of all the missing steps in the front stoops. We had no hot water to speak of, and one coal-burning stove in the living room. So to stay warm during the cold Cleveland winters, we would take a flat iron, encase it in a towel, and then tuck it inside the bed that the three of us shared. Oh, I guess you could say we knew what it was like to struggle, but the truth is we didn't realize how bad we had it, because that's all that we knew. Our whole lives were lived within a few blocks of concrete, and we had no idea of the limitless horizon that lay just outside of our narrow patch of neighborhood. But despite all of that, our mother told us to study so that we could be somebody. Oh, and study we did. Louis and I excelled in school. Well, at least I did initially. When I was 11 years old, my family and I moved to public housing. And although our rent was only $5 a month, we felt, Louis and I, as though we had moved into a castle. There was hot and cold running water, central heat, a refrigerator, a washing machine, and 2 bedrooms. For the first time in our lives, Lou and I had our own separate beds to sleep in. And trust me, nobody appreciated that more than did our mother. But best still, just down the street from us was a rec center where we could take art classes and swim and play ping pong and learn to box. And oh, I took to ping pong and boxing with great passion, arguably too much of one, because my grades soon began to plummet as I spent more time in pool halls and arranging boxing matches for myself. So I suppose not surprisingly, I ended up dropping out of school at the age of 17 and landing a job in the foundry before enlisting in the Army. Now, basic training at Fort McClellan was a whole nother type of experience for me. Now, by the time I arrived at camp, I had a pretty good idea of just how the wonderful folk of Anniston, Alabama felt about people of color. I can never forget how we were treated, three young other recruits and I, when we went to downtown Birmingham for lunch, and the less than kind and generous words that the waitress used to describe us. Now my mother, realizing that my northern attitude would land me in a heap of trouble in the South, had filled me with all kinds of horror stories. So, for the 13 months that I was at camp, I was the one soldier who never ever left the base. Now, eventually we shipped out to Germany, where we were welcomed and treated as heroes. And you know, in addition to rising to the rank of corporal, I earned the title United States Army Ping Pong Champion. So I guess all of those hours that I spent at the rec center were totally valueless. But I tell you something, any new confidence that I may have secured was quickly shattered when I returned to Cleveland and was confronted by all it meant to be poor, black, and uneducated in America. I figured out quickly I was going nowhere fast without at least a high school diploma. So I went back, finished high school, and then I enrolled at West Virginia State College and went on to the University of Minnesota, where I graduated and subsequently secured my JD from Cleveland Marshall, what's now Cleveland Marshall College of Law. Now, in order to make ends meet while I was in law school, I worked as a probation officer, a state liquor enforcement agent, and a waiter on a weekend passenger train to Dallas, Texas. But as soon as I passed the bar exam, I entered practice with my brother Lou, and a few years later, I became the first African-American Democrat elected to the Ohio House of Representatives. Now, I enjoyed 3 wonderful terms there, fighting for pollution control, gun control, yes, even back then, supporting civil rights and social welfare measures. But it quickly became clear to me that it was back here in my hometown where the real work awaited that needed to be done. Clevelanders were flocking to the city's suburbs, costing the city substantial tax dollars. Decent housing and good jobs were pipe dreams for thousands and thousands of Clevelanders. A lot of our neighborhoods were suffering record high unemployment levels, at one point the highest in the nation, and as you may have heard, the city was racked by civil strife. Well, the city was looking for, the residents were looking for somebody who could take on these challenges, and I humbly felt that I was capable of doing so. So in 1965, I ran for mayor, and although my first effort to become mayor was not successful, I was undeterred, and I ran again in 1967, and this time against a very successful lawyer, Seth Taft, from a rather prominent Ohio political family. Now, when Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, he could not have dreamed or imagined that a little over 100 years later, a century later, the grandson of one of the slaves that he freed would defeat the grandson of a United States president to become the mayor of what was then the 8th largest city in the United States. But that's, my friend, is exactly what happened. And at the end of 1967, I became the first African American elected mayor of a major American city. Now, I immediately went to work in trying to realize my vision for the city. I started by persuading then Vice President Hubert Humphrey to return to the city a multi-million-dollar HUD grant that had been rescinded. And I then was able to persuade the business community to raise $4 million. And Mayor Bibb, that was a lot of money back then, $4 million to support an initiative, Cleveland Now. That was an initiative meant to raise funds for local projects that could not be financed with federal dollars. Arguably, the most impactful legislative achievement during my tenure was the enactment of our Equal Employment Opportunity Ordinance, which required all firms that wanted to do business with the city to have integrated workforces. Now, that became a blueprint and a model for similar legislation in other big cities throughout the country. But, I didn't have much time to savor any of my successes because I was constantly beset and besieged by an array of problems, one of which involved our waterways that lie just to the west and to the north of us. Now, when I convened Cleveland's first water task force, I was determined to clean up our lake and our river. Now, because of all the sewage that had been emptied into our lake, it was considered all but dead. But we were determined to remediate it. So we initiated a massive cleanup at Edgewater Park, and there we managed to construct an enclosed chlorinated pool within the lake where families could safely swim. Now, despite all the positive press that particular project received, including a rather memorable photo of me in my swim trunks surrounded by a group of young swimmers. I thought about wearing my swim trunks downtown today, but decided against it. But despite all that positive attention, unfortunately, the project was scuttled as a result of a fatal storm that ravaged the city on July 4th, 1969. And ironically, that was only 12 days after one of the most infamous days in Cleveland history, the day when our river caught fire, ignited, and burned for 30 minutes. Now, Time magazine, not surprisingly, wrote a story on this, and even though they used a photo of a tugboat engulfed in flames from a previous incident, it really didn't matter. The die was cast, and we had become the national poster child for environmental degradation. But only 10 months later, under my leadership, Clevelanders assembled to celebrate the first Earth Day. And we had one of the largest gatherings in the nation. Over 500,000 students from kindergarten to college participated in cleanups and marches and rallies. The Cleveland Press, maybe some of you are old enough to remember that, our evening newspaper at the time, blared a headline that read, "Hippies and housewives unite to protest what man is doing to Mother Earth." So outsiders were no longer laughing at us. Instead, they were applauding us for coming together to reclaim our lake and our river and our other natural assets. Now, shortly thereafter, I had the opportunity to testify before Congress, which by this time included my brother Lou, on the importance of federal involvement and engagement in taking on air and water pollution. And I'm proud to say that the Clean Water Act of 1972 was a result, at least in some part, of Lou and my combined efforts. Now, after my time as mayor here in the city of Cleveland was over, I was a newscaster in New York City, a Cleveland Municipal Court judge, and an ambassador to the Seychelles. But all of those assignments, though important, paled in comparison to serving as mayor of Cleveland. None of them had that same exhilaration, that same energy, that same impact as that job did. None of them had the same transcendent purpose. Well, I know that I've probably taken up a little bit too much of your time. I may have, but so I apologize for that. But I do hope that my story, that of a poor kid from humble beginnings in the city's projects, will inspire each and every one of you to make a difference, to make a little Cleveland history of your own. So God bless you all, and thank you so much for your time.
Boy, he's good, isn't he? All right. Now, our current fantastic mayor that we're getting to know has big shoes to fill, doesn't he? But Mayor Bibb, we want you to know you have all of our support with our hearts and our minds, and we offer you to say a few words, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Kathleen. It certainly is an honor. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. It certainly is an honor and a pleasure to mark this historic occasion in our city. And I just want to reflect on the impact that Carl Stokes had on my life. I remember as a sophomore at American University in DC, I created a major in urban studies. And one of my first courses was on Black political leadership. And guess what book we had to read in the syllabus? Carl Stokes, Promises to Power. So I go to my dorm and I couldn't put the book down. I was the only kid from Cleveland in my class, and that book taught me about the impact that Carl Stokes had, not just on Cleveland, but he was a vanguard in creating the next era of Black political leadership across the nation. For folks that don't know, at the time, there was a major question of whether or not a Black person could be the chief executive of a major American city. Carl Stokes was a trailblazer that led to Harold Washington in Chicago, Tom Bradley in LA, David Dinkins in New York City, Mike White in Cleveland, Ohio. The list goes on. And you don't get a Mayor Justin M. Bibb without Carl B. Stokes. I also want to say that former Mayor Stokes' policy vision continues to have an impact right now in my administration. One commitment I've made is to make sure that we continue to invest in Cleveland's East Side. We know that Carl, thank you. We know that former Mayor Stokes wanted to make sure that the East Side was a beacon of the Black middle class. I believe we can make that vision a reality in the future in our city. I currently serve on the National Board of Climate Mayors across the country, and I want to make sure that Cleveland continues to be a model in America for climate justice every single day. And in closing, I want to say that it's my responsibility to make sure that not only continue the vision of former Mayor Stokes, but I also pass the baton to the next generation that we have right here this morning. So let's make sure we keep up the fight, keep up the hope, and keep Mayor Stokes' vision alive. Thank you so much.
Oh, that was great. Can't wait. All right, now for a few words from Cordell Stokes, Bob Render, and Rick Taft. A couple remembrances of your father, your colleague, and on behalf of your father, Cordell, so happy you're here, sir, and please.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. This is a wonderful occasion for me and my family and my guests to be able to participate in today. As usual, whenever I walk into an establishment like this or an event like this, I often see people that I grew up with, who I observed at the highest level of leadership that they participated. And I want to begin, I'm going to have a three-phase prong to this. Number one, I'm going to recognize those participants that put on this event. Number two, I'm going to acknowledge the guests that I have assembled here who have participated in my life as well as my family's life, and which makes it so much more important for them to be present today. And then I'm going to conclude with some words about both my father and my uncle, because if you know one thing, you can't talk about one without the other. In order just to go ahead and wrap this thing up, and it will not contain stuff you can read in Promises of Power Then and Now. But number one, I want to, as I look down here, I want to thank former Chief Natoya Walker, now Dr. Natoya Walker Minor. Your husband is a great friend as well, but you and I go a long way back. Childhood almost. You've been very, very supportive of my family, and I greatly appreciate it. Glenn Shoemate, you like my brother, as you know. We've been through the battles. You have given me an opportunity to expand my business, and then you and I just maintain our personal and professional relationship. Then Blaine Griffin, Council President Blaine Griffin. Let's give him a big hand. This is someone that I've known for many, many years, and I've observed personally his desire and goals to want to be a leader in this city in an elected capacity. And someone that learned at the heels of our most prominent political advisor of all time, Arnold Pinckney. And I want to thank you, Blake. You know, you and I already talked about your ability to get here. So this meant a lot to me to see your presence, and I want to say thank you. You'll hear from Bob Render shortly, who's one of my guests. But publicly, I've not had an opportunity to say this. Council President, myself, and many others selected to support former Council President Kevin Kelly during the last mayoral election. It was one hell of an election. A lot of different dynamics. But I'm going to tell you, this people spoke, they spoke clearly, and what I've observed and what I listened to, and on top of that, having Charlie Butts and your campaign manager didn't help. I mean, didn't hurt at all. I tell you that. Ryan Puentes, you had a phenomenal team. I thought you ran a hell of a campaign. And what I've observed, I'm gonna tell you, I see a future, not only with yourself, but your ability to have Council President Pernell Jones, a good brother. Council President Blaine Griffin, a good brother. And the incoming county executive, in my opinion, will be Chris Ronayne, who should have been here today with me. Passes on all this love, but he wanted to say he supports us, and I want to say I support you, Mayor Bibbs. Obviously, I could talk about Councilman Polenzek and my good friend Zach Reed and others. Charles C., longtime great friend of my father's and me. And then, of course, my man Peter Lawson Jones, former county commissioner and state rep. When I was in junior high, he used to come in with his knee pads all taped up. But we used to get it over at Woodbury every Saturday. He used to come down and we used to get it in there until the knees broke down, because you just got your stuff together. So I know, hey. And then you know what? You've had a phenomenal acting career. As you know, I text you all the time when my wife and I catch you on one of your movies. Get your credit, do your thing, brother. The last person, of course, is my wife, Teresa. Please stand. Come on up, girl. Put on. She got to go to work too, and I keep her working. Keep her working. We got to get some money in here. Yeah, we're gonna keep her working. Yeah. Pass out your cards, baby, a little later. Pass your cards out. But Teresa's been the love of my life, and we have an anniversary, which Dave, I'll be on vacation coming up this week. And we're gonna do what we do. But the mayor, Mr. Mayor, do something about these gas prices. Okay.
I ain't Joe Biden.
I know that. you got to connect. we got to get the congressman. All right, so let me close with this, ladies and gentlemen. Number one, I want to thank Aaron Fountain, Stephanie Phelps, for their hard work as staff members and doing what they need to do in order to make this event successful. I want to say congratulations to the Cleveland Restoration Society on their 50th anniversary. And I want to give a particular thanks to the leader of this organization, and that would be Kathleen Crowther. Very good, very good. Ladies and gentlemen, you know the long story politically and all of that about my father, even my uncle. But I want to share something with you personal. Number one, you had two black men while working in a professional capacity to try and become somebody who took custody of each of their children. Now, I wasn't a part of when our families, my first cousins, we actually enjoined in the same house with my grandmother. I came right after that. But we began on 147th, the family, before Larchmere and before moving to Cleveland. But as you've heard about some of the trials and tribulations that my father went through in order to get himself to where he ended up becoming, my father died in 1996. I was probably about 25 years of age or so. So I didn't get a chance to actually go into my professional career and deal with him accordingly as a father-son might do. But I did have my uncle. That's one thing, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But with my father, when we moved to New York was one of the most disastrous cities, murders, dirty, urban, the urban conditions were terrible. And we all lived in it. But there was also an extended beauty about being in New York that you couldn't capture anywhere else in America. But as dangerous as it was, my father had to do a couple things. Get me on the subway, show me how to use the subway. I had to learn how to cook, which I do every day now. I had to learn how to do the clothing, to be very supportive. And when I did get sick, he would come in the Channel 4 van and pick me up, and I'd ride with him, or be at the news station. Whatever it took, he had to do what he had to do with 3 kids, me being the youngest. The other thing he did was to make sure I knew how to handle myself in the street. Being a former middleweight champion out of West Virginia State College and being street-based, that's something that he made sure that I was prepared for, and I took that in with great graciousness, and sometimes took it to the next level that my father even took. But the point is that it is what it is, but he prepared me. When he did die, my uncle was in a position where he was able to be a part of my life, where he could counsel me on my professional moves. He participated with us when we did our Black Caucus in Las Vegas, in particular when we prepared for the Karl Rove meetings. He was very instrumental, helping us to shape up how we should take the approach with the Karl Rove and that type of administration. But more importantly, the good thing about my uncle, was that I had an opportunity later on to do business with him. Obviously, he was outside of Congress by now. And then lastly, going back to what I spoke about with Dave Meganhart, now being back here full-time in this, I've always had clients here, but I am West Coast based in several different cities. But Michael Obey, for those of you that don't know, right around 2014, he knew that I was moving back into the trajectory of a good economy for my personal self after coming off the 2008 the situation, the economic downfall. And so I set up my own business, but I first counseled with my uncle. And so when he died in August of 2015, in September of 2015, I established what's called CLC Consultant Group. And one of my first clients was Glenn's Group, and then others on the West Coast. But the name of the company was established as Carl Lewis and Cordell. as a remembrance of what they have meant to me and how they have built me to be able to deal with adversity that all of us have to go through. It's not exclusive to me. And so being here when I have an individual in my life now as a Dave Meganhart, who I have the greatest amount of respect for, he saw the importance that I maintain the integrity of that business and that legacy. And I want to say thank you, Dave, because you're a part of my family now. Please give him a big hand because it means more than you know. In closing, it's not so much about the contract or the ability of what it's doing. The uniqueness is that the title of the contract is Central Neighborhood Project Director, with an exclusive focus on trying to organize and implement employment and training services within the Central Neighborhood of Ward 5 and surrounding zip codes. That's where my father and my uncle derived. So who could have called it at this point in time in my business that I would actually be focusing on their neighborhood and trying to make an impact in their neighborhood, which is all of our neighborhoods. So ladies and gentlemen, I want to say this is a very humbling experience. I want to thank all of the extended partners with Cleveland Restoration Society. I want to again thank the mayor for allowing us the opportunity to be on site and to get these things done. And I want to say congratulations to the former historic marker recipient and all the future. I think we got Reverend Cavanis and several others coming up. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you and God bless all of you.
And we will get to the marker unveiling. Mr. Render, Bob Render's going to say a word. Rick Taft, then Council President. So we hope we can get to the unveiling pretty soon.
I didn't hold it up. Good afternoon. We owe another round of applause to what the Natoya and Kathleen, what you're doing. I think Carter G. Woodson summed it up when he said, "A people who have no recorded history are always neglected." That's why the work you do is so important. Mahalia Jackson used to sing, "In that great getting up morning, fare thee well, fare thee well." Cordell, today is one of those great getting up mornings. Mayor Justin Bibb, as a beneficiary of the Stokes legacy, you must be overcome with pride and joy to have this unveiling done on your watch as the 58th mayor of the city of Cleveland. I'm going to just tell a few stories of my remembrance of Carl Stokes. I just got out the service, enrolled at community college. We were trying to figure out how to get the mayor to come over to community college and speak. There had never been a mayor speaking at community college. So I tried, Mayor Bibb, you know the normal challenges you have in Cordell trying to get through the bureaucracy to get to a mayor. So I put my big boy pants on after I found out where Carl lived on Larchmere, went over there, took a deep breath, got out the car, knocked on the door. Somebody, I can't remember, Cordell, who, whether it was your mom or a day work, somebody that worked in the, during the day, came to the door, they invited me in, and I told the mayor, I said, "I'm having a problem. We'd like to get you to speak at community college." He said, "Go see Sarah Foster. Call Sarah, and she's going to take care of it." I called Sarah. We got to Sarah. She took care of it. Carl took Tri-C by storm. You couldn't get in the auditorium. The fire marshal had to come and make people get off the staircase, go in another room. It was a huge success. We worked with, at the time, the head of student services was Fred Perkins. Another little story about Carl. I remember watching TV. Mayor Stokes, George Forbes, Arnold Pinckney, black ministers, black civic leaders, and other community activists walked the streets of Cleveland when Dr. King was assassinated. We were one of the only cities that did not go up in flames. There were 100-some cities in the United States that they were rioting and they just burned down most of the city. That did not happen in Cleveland. I remember when Carl spoke at the dedication at the post office in honor of John O'Holly. Cordell, that was one of his mentors. Took him all around the state, how to understand politics. Well, while he was making his remarks, he used the word ingrate. I had to ask somebody, what does that mean? I have since used that word for some of my own family members and friends in greats. I remember when the Public Utilities Building in the federal courthouse was named in his honor. I remember when Virgil Dominic, general manager of TV8, and I met Judge Stokes in his chambers at the Justice Center for an interview. That interview turned into a documentary called The Mayor and the Milestone. I remember when Carl would be over at the Lancers, chopping it up with George Nixon and having a little toddy for the body, okay? And then he'd go over to the pool hall. You know that, Dion. He'd walk over to the pool hall, Paul Wells, and the Young Bloods mayor would be lined up there. And Carl would say, rack them up, take a number, and he got to teaching them a master class in the art of billiards. And he whooped them like they stole a government jackass, okay? And sent them on their way looking crazy. I remember when he was invited to Ludlow Elementary School, my oldest son, Timothy, there was show and tell. Oh, he was a rock star. The mayor at Ludlow Elementary School, the classroom was filled, teachers, and even the principal was there. I remember when the African American Archives Auxiliary of the Western Reserve Historical Society sponsored the 25th anniversary of Carl's election as the mayor of the city of Cleveland. Lou was able to get a hold of Julian Bond as the keynote speaker because Walter Mondale was out. It wasn't scheduled to be the speaker, but he was out of the country. And we thank Lou. That was magical. He could look in that black book, called Julian. Julian came in and gave a remarkable speech. I remember when Judge Stokes swore me and some of the other residents on 128th Street as street club officers in the next term. Finally, I remember being invited to several of Dorothy and Frank Miller's annual New Year's Day dinners on East 128th Street, along with the family and close friends like Cordell and Carl, and others like Bert Jennings and James Barrett. The food was to die for. Turkey, ham, fried chicken. Did you hear me? Fried chicken. Okay? Some chitterlings, dressings, greens of all kinds, hot rolls, yams, desserts galore. Now the young folks won't get this. And some Hoppin' Johns, AKA Carolina peas and rice. And indeed, today is a great getting up morning.
Okay, and that was awesome. On behalf of his father, really, Rick Taft, please come say a few words. Followed by Council President Blaine Griffin.
We celebrate a whole movement and some of its champions. We know Carl was a champion. My father was also, and indeed my mother, were also, in their own quiet way, champions. My mother was a Karamu devotee, and she would have loved Peter's riff. But I am here because my father proved that a core virtue of democracy is to lose with honor, which he did. And beyond the loss, there was a friendship. And the friendship lasted long enough. So when Carl passed from the scene, he couldn't have said, but his family said, "Come speak at my memorial service." And I watched my father do that with tremendous grace and genuine love for this man who had beaten him and served the city so well. I offer you a glimpse of history. This is the Time magazine issue of November 17th, 1967, and in it is the famous picture of my mother giving Shirley Stokes flowers at 3 a.m. the morning after the election. Thank you for having me here.
Losing with dignity. And the council president, please, Mr. Griffin.
Good afternoon. had to look to make sure it was afternoon. I first have learned a long time ago the first thing that I must do, and I think one of my colleagues left, is to acknowledge all of my council colleagues that are here. I see Councilman Mike Polinsik. We can give him a round of applause. He's here. And then Councilman Kevin Conwell. I think that he had to leave, but I want to make sure I acknowledge Councilman Conwell and all of the body of council that's here today. You know, a lot of you may not believe this, but when I first came to 601 Lakeside, and now Dr. Minor, but then it was Chief Walker Minor, was my boss, I came in with a full head of hair and a full beard. And I used to run with this rowdy bunch, because I was radical when I was younger. And I ran with this rowdy bunch called the Carl Stokes Brigade. And we met every week at Eloise, where we would get blessed with the likes of Stanley Tolliver and people like Arthur Woods and others that would literally sit down, and Angela Woodson knows this, and they would educate us, Lane Dunbar and some of those folks. And it was all in the spirit of Carl B. Stokes. I would subsequently get an opportunity to become very close friends with his son, Cordell, who has become like a brother to me. And a lot of people don't know this, but we have busy schedules as council people. And I had a full schedule packed this morning, Mayor. You know, we had all these things that we had to be at and all of these constituent calls. But Cordell didn't leave me any choice. He said, Blaine, you got to be at this event. So here I am canceling meetings with heads of big corporations and other things because I needed to be here to support this moment, because the spirit of Carl Stokes is still coming through at this point in time. We are actually at the precipice of a historic moment as we speak, to have an African American mayor of a major city and an African American council president of a major city work close together to make sure that we keep the spirit of Carl Stokes moving to take care of the people of this city. One of the things that I always appreciate about the Carl Stokes and the Lewis Stokes legend is that they kept it real. They went from the boardroom to the streets. They went from the bar rooms to the pulpits. They were everyday people, and they never forgot how to make sure that they keep people at the forefront of the decisions that they make. Ladies and gentlemen, institutions and systems do not always serve the people who they're supposed to. And one of the things that I would tell you that I've always gotten from the Stokes family is that stay close to the people. So every day, I make it a point not to get caught up in the comfort, coziness of 601 Lakeside, but to immerse myself into the community and to the people that I serve, because that's who I'm here to represent, the people of the city of Cleveland. So I thank everybody so much for giving me the opportunity. Kathleen, thank you so much. These mean so much to us in this city to have these historical markers. My good friend, dear friend, and a person who I learned so much from, Chief Natoya Walker. I always would call her my chief because that's what she has always been to me. And to all the Carl Stokes Brigade and to the next generation of leaders, let the spirit of Carl and Lewis Stokes permeate this city for years and centuries to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Council President. Yes, he is so busy. We're so honored you're here. And now we're going to unveil this marker. And let me explain how it's going to happen. First, we're going to have a representative from the Ohio Marker Program, Stacia Kusajewski. Might have not done that perfectly. Say a couple words, Stacy, and then the mayor, the council president, and Cordell will come forward and lift up the veil. And then Glenn Shoemate, you please come forward and read so we can hear what the marker says. You can look at the marker and have a piece of cake afterwards. So Stacia, please.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Stacia Kusajewski, and I'm the Director of Outreach from the Ohio History Connection. And the subject of today's marker has been talked about in a much more eloquent way than I could ever imagine. But what I can talk a little bit more about is the Ohio Historical Marker Program, which the Ohio History Connection has managed since 1957. So I've worked at the Ohio History Connection for over 20 years now, and one of the things I always get tired of hearing is nothing important ever happened in Ohio. There's nothing of note that happened here. And if anyone ever says that to you, I want you to say to them, the nice young woman, and remember young, that's the important part of this moment, the nice young woman from the Ohio History Connection said to me there are over 1,700 markers around this state that begs to differ. So I think people a lot of times think these things happen somewhere else. Civil rights happened somewhere else. It didn't happen here in Cleveland, Ohio. But our local stories and our state stories are our national stories. And I think that's the important thing to remember about our local history and the history of places like Cleveland, Ohio. So with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Kathleen. I do have a few commendations from the governor, as well as from Bert Logan, our executive director and CEO, and our board of trustees. So thank you very much for allowing me to sit up here on this dais with a distinguished guest today, and I look forward to your marker unveiling.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
So it's an honor to be here today for this recognition. And I want to provide remarks for what is actually on the marker. Carl Burton Stokes, 1927 to 1996. Carl Stokes was born in Cleveland on June 21st, 1927. Recognized for his trailblazing service as a public official, Mayor Stokes is one of few American politicians whose career spanned all three branches of government. Over 30 years, he served 3 terms as an Ohio legislator, 2 terms as Cleveland mayor, and 8 years as municipal judge. In 1972, he became the first black anchorman for a television station in New York City. After a decade of working in television, Mayor Stokes returned to Cleveland to work as an attorney for the United Auto Workers. In 1994, President Bill Clinton appointed him ambassador to the Republic of Seychelles, where he served as an ambassador. He was diagnosed with cancer, and he died in Cleveland on April 3rd, 1996. When Mayor Stokes was elected mayor in 1967, he became the first African-American mayor of a major American city. At the time, Cleveland ranked as the 8th largest city in the nation. During his tenure, Mayor Stokes fought for the city's black population, securing more jobs than any time previously. He was emphatic that black businesses received city contracts and that banks lent money to black-owned businesses. His Cleveland Now anti-poverty program sought and won federal funding, state, local, and other private sources for urban development. Despite significant challenges, including a shootout between the black nationalists and the Cleveland police, Mayor Stokes persevered, served 2 full terms before deciding not to run again in 1971. As Cleveland Mayor Stokes transformed the energy of the civil rights movement into a model of black political power, we're here today to commemorate the marker of the Ohio Historic Connection and the Cleveland Restoration Society as part of the Cleveland Civil Rights Trail funded by the U.S. Department of Parks. We appreciate everyone being here today, and we certainly want to continue the legacy of Mayor Stokes. Appreciation from Mayor Bibb and Council President Council President Blaine Griffith. So thank you everyone for being here today.